Hello, I'm Chris Hartwell, and welcome to the Heartbeat. Today we're going to be talking about episode 8 of season 1 of HBO's The Night Of. Join me, won't you? So, with that, the first and potentially only season of The Night Of comes to an end. Though, given the excellent critical response and really solid ratings, I wouldn't be surprised at all if it continues on as an anthology series a bit like True Detective. But looking now at this finale episode, titled Call of the Wild, I wanted to focus on two elements which not only tied together this final hour and 30 minutes of television, but really the entire 9-hour experience that was The Night Of. And the first of those two elements was Jon Stone's closing statement. And I quote, "Beyond a reasonable doubt." We hear that term a lot, but what does it really mean, huh? What's its definition? It doesn't have one. It's what we think. And as much as what we think, what we feel. And what we feel, and what you feel, will determine what happens to the rest of this young man's life. Like we've talked about in weeks past, The Night Of has not really ever been that much about the facts, so much as it's been about how people have perceived and felt about those facts. And that was readily apparent in every single one of the individuals that Chandra had take the stand this week. With each of them, due to the absence of a smoking gun, or in this case, a blood-dripping knife, all she could really do was hope that the jury would feel towards them more distrust, more dislike, and more disgust than they already felt towards Nas. And even with Detective Box, who was finally brought to life this episode, really spurred on by the weight of Nas's life on his shoulders, what she saw was about to get flushed down the toilet, even with him as he tirelessly endeavored to further uncover the facts of that night, piece together the truth, and discover if that dripping knife had actually been in the hands of Raymond Hall, even he was still defeated by perception. The perception that, as Helen Wise so unfortunately but aptly put it, we've got more on the kid. Which was exactly why she didn't admit that evidence, or why she never once bothered to cross-examine those that Chandra had take the stand. Helen knew that her inaction would be perceived by the jury as a measured and upstanding dismissal of irrelevant facts. And perfectly in line with that attitude was Helen's final decision not to continue the trial after the jury had resolved that they were deadlocked. A decision on her part that was so simply explained when she walked out of that courtroom, high heels in hand and comfy sneakers on her feet. She was tired of the show, tired of looking a certain way, tired of speaking a certain way, all in the name of altering people's perceptions and feelings. And that's not to say that Helen Wise has no soul, or that Detective Box wasn't able to get through to her on some level, which I really felt in those few poignant moments after she finished her closing statement and was left just staring at that knife. The words that had escaped her mouth were finally penetrating her soul, words that she could no longer perceive or feel to be true. And we really do have Detective Box to thank for that, because Chandra and Nas really didn't do much to convince her at all by having the latter take the stand. Though I can't deny just how much I love that entire scene, certainly finding it to be one of the highlights of the finale. Which partially came from the fact that it just so confidently addressed a number of the critiques that have been leveled at this show. That just being the at times logical, at times extremely stupid actions of its lead character, specifically from the night of the murder. And for me, I really felt like Nas, while on that stand, summed up pretty much everything that Zaillian and Price showed us in the first episode. A man who was drunk, drugged, scared, and in a blind panic, still able to, on some gut level, know how it looked. Which, again, goes right back to perception, but more than anything, what those few minutes on the stand did was finally push this character to a place where he, when asked, "Did you kill her?" responded with, "I don't know." Which leads directly into the second element found in this finale that really connected so many different pieces seen all throughout this series, that being Jack London's novel, Call of the Wild. Which, to derail that entire discussion just for a moment, though I did find Freddie's gifting of that book to Nas and his decision not to say goodbye very fitting for that character, and even found his belief that he was taking care of Nas an interesting peek into his warped perception, I did find that his ability to get that DVD to Stone's doorstep stretched credulity just a little bit. But back to the novel itself and the different ways that it connects to The Night Of. Of course, we have the obvious connections, like Nas's wolf tattoo, or that both he and the central character of the novel, a dog named Buck, were befriended and helped by a character named John. But even more than that, in both stories, both dog and human were plucked from their comfortable lives and thrown into a place that forced them to act in ways that they previously never thought possible. So with Buck the dog, he started out as this abused and domineered pup, only to ultimately become the alpha male of his dog sledding team. In the same way, after receiving his literal crown this episode, Nas showcased his dominance by being the one to approach a new inmate and weigh whether he could be manipulated into getting them more drugs. Also, in London's novel, out of necessity, the once domesticated Buck is forced to start hunting for himself and develops this irreversible taste for fresh meat and warm blood. Not so different to Nas's addiction to heroin, an addiction that didn't just affect him. Like Don Taylor said about Andrea, an addict's net casts wide, and Nas's destructive net really pulled many down with him, not the least of which being Chandra. And for me, really the most heartbreaking moment in the scene where she smuggled heroin into him was at the end, after Nas had so callously used that woman, all but forcing her to bring him that drug. After all of that effort and all of that sacrifice, really the sacrifice of that entire relationship, how did the scene end? Blurring out, and a split second later, blurring back in. The entire trip and all of the quote-unquote happiness that it had brought to Nas had added up to nothing, a completely non-existent scene in the story of his life. I just thought it was such a subtle but powerful way to communicate the destructive power of drugs and the lies that they tell to those who are enslaved to them. Though, when it comes to using Chandra, truth be told, I kind of felt like the writers sort of used the character just a little bit. Just in that kiss from last week felt so unearned, only written in there to really get her off the case this week as to allow Stone to make that rousing closing speech. To go back to Nas, though, finally admitting that he no longer knew if he killed Andrea or not, that really was the final connection, the one that I could find anyways, between Call of the Wild and The Night of. By both stories' end, both Canine and Homo sapien were uncertain if what they'd become had always been within them, merely being drawn forth because of their experiences, or if it was something that had been forcibly laid upon them. And it was that uncertainty that pushed both dog and man to kind of just return to the wild in the end, disconnected from those that they had once loved. And for Nas, I think it went beyond disconnection as he saw his old friend in that diner. The look in his eyes, he was ready to hurt that guy for what he had said on the stand. And more devastating still was just seeing how detached Nas was from his family, illustrated in moments like when Nas finally walked out of Rikers prison as a free man, and we were never once shown his father's face in close-up. Nas just couldn't meet his gaze, and in a similar way, he understood that remaining close to his mother would only further water that seed of doubt that he may indeed have actually been the one who murdered Andrea. But for me, I think the most crushing moment was watching Nas return to that bridge and there realize, as he looked over at the Andrea that wasn't there, he, in a sense, had become her, just as addicted, alone, and afraid. And I think, too, feeling a whole new kind of sadness and guilt. He may not have been the one that stabbed Andrea, but he certainly helped her down that road to death, not genuinely attempting to slow a downward spiral that now he himself knew all too well. And I thought, too, that the writers really drew some beautiful parallels between Nas and Stone this week as well, one of which being when they cut from Stone's eczema-plagued hands to Nas's drug-grasping hands. To me, all those parallels brought out that while Nas was still uncertain if he had been concealing who he was his entire life, Stone was ready to admit it. He had always been and will always be a man who struggles with eczema, both physical and emotional, ever tempted to shed relationships as quickly as he sheds his dead skin. And that's why he had to finally walk through the crucible of finally standing up in front of those jurors, truly looking like a man with leprosy, and actually defending Nas. Not for the money, not for the glory, and not because he was a perfect man, but because his cross to bear was to, in his imperfect state, come alongside those who, as that TV ad put it, suffer every day, the forgotten ones, suffering all alone and living in fear. And overall, I did think that this finale episode of The Night Of actually struck a pretty good balance between that growth and that hope, and also the depressing recognition that Nas's story was really only one of thousands, which was so painfully captured in the moment where Nas was leaving the prison as a whole new batch of inmates, perhaps some as innocent as him, were receiving the exact same spiel that he'd received months earlier. Alas, the cycle continues, and more tragedies just like this one are sure to occur. And with that, I'm going to call it. That is a wrap on these Night of Reviews. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me week to week. This has been a lot of fun. I've loved this show. I've loved talking to you. I've loved how kind of small and kind of tight-knit this community of the Night of fans have been and how much interaction we've gotten because of that. It's been a real genuine pleasure, and thank you so much for interacting with me, for clicking those thumbs up, for sharing these videos. During the run of the show, I've exceeded 2,000 subscribers, and that's been a really exciting thing, and that is definitely due to your guys' interaction with me. So thank you so much. And I would love for you guys to continue with me. Up next, starting on October 2nd, we have the premiere of Westworld, though my first review will probably go up on October 3rd. And just like this, week to week, I will be reviewing that show, and I would love for you guys to join me for that. But before I get ahead of myself, definitely comment below and let me know what you guys thought of this finale episode. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Was it as satisfyingly unsatisfying as you could have hoped? Definitely comment below and let me know. Finally, please do subscribe. I'm going to continue to review films and television on this channel, and I would love for you to stay up to date on all of those things. But for now, I'm Chris Hartwell. This is The Heartbeat. Thank you for joining me.